They told me I was interfering with progress until I cranked open that century-old gate and watched their luxury development disappear under a sea of black sludge. Here I stand at this ancient control wheel, coffee steaming in the morning chill, watching million-dollar construction equipment vanish into toxic muck where Crystal Springs used to sparkle. The roar of dying generators echoes across the drained basin while that unmistakable stench of exposed lake floor, decades of buried corruption, fills the dawn air. In my grip, my grandfather's weathered thermos holds the same dark roast he drank every sunrise for 35 years. Same rocky outcrop where he stood, watch over water so pure you could drink it straight from the source, back when the only structures were honest fishing shacks, not some power-hungry developer's money-grab pyramid scheme. The site foreman screaming bloody murder into his radio about environmental catastrophe and federal investigators. I just sip my coffee and grin. But let me rewind and explain how this war started. What would you do if greedy developers tried to steal your family's century-old homestead? Drop a comment about your location. I guarantee you've witnessed developer horror stories too. My name's Marcus Riverside, and this saga begins with 52 acres of pristine Montana waterfront that my grandfather purchased in 1923 for $400 in a handshake deal. Back then, Crystal Springs was just a mining company's settling pond. But Grandpa envisioned something different, a sanctuary where a man could sip his dawn coffee without some power-suited vulture lecturing him about community compliance standards. I'm 54, third-generation hydraulic engineer, and every morning for 4 years, I've perched on that same weathered stone ledge where Grandpa taught me to read water currents and identify eagle calls. The perfume of mountain pine mingles with campfire smoke from the fieldstone hearth he constructed by hand. Those ancient granite shelves still sing the same tune under my work boots, a melody that means sanctuary. That tranquility lasted precisely until Victoria Sterling arrived. Victoria, platinum extensions, designer everything, smile like a barracuda in Patagonia gear. Rolled up from Denver 18 months ago with enough capital to purchase the largest estate on the water and enough arrogance to redesign everyone else's lifestyle. Her spouse Garrett controls most of the excavation companies across 4 counties. Within 8 months, she'd manipulated herself into Development Authority chairman by promising to boost property values and preserve community character. You know the breed, the type of woman who'd file noise complaints about morning birdsong. The real warfare commenced when I returned from a 3-week contract assignment downstate. I'm navigating up my dirt access road, that familiar gravel crunch beneath my tires signaling home, when I notice these fluorescent pink survey markers planted along my waterline like miniature conquest flags. Before I can even shut off the ignition, here comes Victoria's pearl-white Range Rover kicking up dust clouds as she blocks my driveway diagonally. She emerges wearing footwear that costs more than my quarterly insurance premium, brandishing a folder like it's a royal proclamation. Marcus, perfect timing. That rehearsed real estate smile could slice diamonds. I have exciting news regarding your property. In my experience, when someone announces exciting news about your property, clutch your checkbook and sprint. She launches into this presentation about an urgent Development Authority assembly. Curious how urgencies always materialize when the guy who might protest is conveniently absent. Unanimous decision, she claims. Community Enhancement Initiative. 140 luxury retreats transforming our underutilized shoreline into an exclusive waterfront resort destination, including my land. Your property, she says, sliding legal documents toward me with those crimson claws, has been designated for community contribution for the collective benefit. I'm gripping my grandfather's title deed. Ink might be weathered, but those boundary lines are etched in bedrock. Every acre, every pine, every foot of shoreline that 4 generations of Riversides have safeguarded. Victoria, this land's been family-owned since 1923. That deed's registered at the county office. She waves dismissively like she's swatting a gnat. Oh, that antiquated survey is likely inaccurate anyway. Times evolve, Marcus. Development happens. Then comes the statement that reveals exactly what kind of battle we're fighting. Besides, I think we can all acknowledge your rustic cabin doesn't exactly align with our vision for Crystal Springs' future. My rustic cabin. 5 generations of memories. The place where my father learned to fly fish, where I taught my daughter to skip stones across water so transparent you could spot trout swimming 25 feet down. Not sophisticated enough for Princess Victoria's country club fantasy, she outlines the schedule like she's granting me a favor. Construction commences in 35 days, project completion in 24 months. The Development Authority's corporate attorneys have rubber-stamped everything. Fighting it would bankrupt me before I ever reached a courtroom. Don't complicate this unnecessarily, she says, climbing back into her Range Rover. The lingering scent of her expensive fragrance pollutes the pine-scented atmosphere like a chemical threat. As those taillights vanish down my gravel drive, I'm recalling what Grandpa used to say while we sat on this ledge. Son, sometimes you must battle for what's righteous, even when the odds are stacked against you, especially then. Time to discover exactly what that century-old deed actually states, and what it doesn't say about the rest of this water system. Victoria didn't waste time demonstrating exactly what kind of neighbor she intended to be. 4 days later, I'm savoring my customary morning coffee on the stone ledge, steam rising in the crisp atmosphere, that familiar aroma of pine blending with lake water, when this gleaming SUV rumbles down my access road. Out steps some guy in a polo shirt with Crystal Springs community standards embroidered on the breast pocket. "Sir, terminate that activity immediately," he declares, pointing at my coffee mug like it's radioactive. Noise violation about my morning coffee. Apparently, my boots on the granite at 5:45 a.m. violated freshly instituted quiet periods. Amazing how those regulations materialized right after our discussion about my non-compliant cabin. That was merely the appetizer. Next came the ledge inspection. Some clipboard bureaucrat declared my family's century-old granite outcrop a safety hazard, violating 19 regulations that didn't exist the previous week. Those weathered stones that had supported 4 generations of Riverside suddenly failed to meet current structural specifications. $60,000 to remediate it, more than I paid for my house. The Development Authority Board, Victoria's entire yacht club crew, rubber-stamped every citation. Helen from the Garden Society suddenly developed passionate opinions about my non-compliant shoreline landscaping. Tom from upstream, who'd waved every morning for 4 years, now examined his shoes whenever I drove past. But here's the advantage of being a hydraulic engineer. I actually understand how to interpret the fine print. My father always said, when someone's attempting to screw you with documentation, the devil's in the details they hope you'll overlook. I spent that weekend in the county records basement, inhaling musty air, thick with decades of forgotten bureaucracy. My yellow notepad filled with observations, pages rustling each time I flipped them, and what I discovered there made my coffee taste considerably sweeter. The Development Authority's incorporation documents looked like they'd been rushed through a Formula One pit crew, missing signatures, improper notifications. When you're seizing someone's land, apparently you skip the legal formalities, but the real gold mine was buried in my grandfather's 1923 deed, written in that ornate old legal language, riparian rights extending to the center line of said water body. Most people have zero comprehension what riparian rights signify. I studied them in engineering school. When you own waterfront property, you sometimes own more than the soil under your structure. Sometimes you own to the middle of the water. Sometimes the water itself. Sometimes rights that make developers break out in cold sweats. While I'm photocopying deed records, someone slips an envelope under the courthouse door and disappears. Inside were copies of environmental impact assessments, the ones that were supposed to be filed before you can construct 140 retreats on pristine waterfront. Keyword, supposed. Turns out federal environmental law has genuine teeth, unlike Development Authority bylaws, the kind of teeth that come with agents who don't care about your political connections or campaign contributions. So I filed a complaint with the State Environmental Division, photographs, surveys, detailed engineering analysis of watershed damage, gift-wrapped the whole case for them. Their response arrived faster than pizza delivery. Construction suspended pending comprehensive environmental review. But here's where things got fascinating. When I was excavating through those Development Authority meeting transcripts, I noticed something curious about the construction bids. Garrett Sterling Construction, that would be Victoria's spouse, had submitted a proposal that was mysteriously 18% lower than everyone else's. Funny how that works when your wife controls the contract approval process. When Victoria received that environmental suspension letter, she came storming down my access road like a hurricane in designer activewear. The fake sweetness had evaporated, revealing the steel underneath. "You have no conception who you're messing with," she snarled, that manicured finger jabbing toward my chest. Her voice carried the sharp edge of someone accustomed to getting her way through intimidation and checkbooks. "Is that a threat, Victoria?" "It's a promise. This project is happening, Marcus, with or without your cooperation. Maybe you should consider what's best for your future around here." The way she emphasized future made the hair on my neck stand up. This wasn't just about retreats anymore. This was about power, money, and what happens when someone threatens both. As her Range Rover disappeared in a cloud of gravel dust, I could hear the distant rumble of bulldozers working other lots around the water. Whatever Victoria and Garrett had planned, they were moving fast and cutting corners. I poured myself another cup of coffee and settled back down on those non-compliant granite shelves. In the gathering twilight, something glinted across the water, construction lights from the eastern shore where crews were working past sunset. Time to discover exactly what other corners they might be cutting. Because if there's one thing I learned from Grandpa, it's that people in a hurry to get rich usually leave a trail of mistakes behind them. and I was just getting started following that trail. Victoria's next move proved she'd graduated from petty harassment to full-scale psychological warfare. I woke Wednesday morning to boots crunching gravel outside my bedroom window. 4:15 a.m., not exactly coffee time. 3 guys in black tactical gear were patrolling my shoreline with flashlights, claiming they were private security ensuring community safety compliance. The acrid smell of their cigarettes drifted through my screen as they stomped around like they owned the place. When I stepped onto my porch in my robe, one actually told me I was creating a disturbance by activating my porch light on my own damn property at 4:30 a.m. "Gentlemen," I said, "unless you're here to arrest me, you're trespassing. We have authorization from the Development Authority." The stockier one smirked. "Right. Because development authorities totally have police powers now." By Friday, Victoria had somehow convinced the county to barricade the old access road my family had used since Truman was president. A shiny new barrier with a digital lock and a sign, "Authorized residents only." Guess whose name wasn't on that authorization list? Now I got to drive 4 extra miles around the water just to reach my own driveway. Nothing says community enhancement like locking out the guy you're trying to rob. The Whisper campaign started immediately. At Morrison's feed store, where I'd bought everything from fence posts to fishing line for 25 years, old Pete suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. "Sorry, Marcus, can't extend credit anymore. Orders from above." At the cafe, conversations died when I walked in. Sarah, the waitress, the good Sarah, not the Development Authority variety, leaned close while pouring my coffee. "Victoria's telling everyone you're having a breakdown since your daughter moved away," she whispered. "Says you might do something dangerous with all that engineering knowledge." My daughter. 3 years gone to college and none of their business, but apparently fair game for character assassination. Funny how personal situations become ammunition when you're standing between someone and their money. Anonymous notes started appearing on my windshield. "Sell and leave. Don't make this messy. Some battles can't be won. You know what happens when you push an engineer past his breaking point? We start looking for structural weaknesses in everything, including our enemies' plans." I spent Saturday at the Historical Archives, breathing that distinctive perfume of old paper and forgotten secrets. Mrs. Patterson, the volunteer librarian who'd probably witnessed every scheme this county had cooked up since Korea, kept bringing me dusty boxes. "Terrible what they're doing to you, dear," she whispered, glancing around like the walls had ears. "But these mining company records might interest you. Sometimes the old solutions work best." She wasn't kidding. Crystal Springs wasn't always a lake. It was created in 1922 when Mountain View Mining Company built a control structure to manage water flow downstream. The company went belly up during the Depression. But here's where bureaucracy gets beautiful. The dam ownership was never properly transferred to anyone. It just disappeared into paperwork limbo. I'm staring at faded photographs of bearded men in overalls operating this massive stone and timber dam. And there are the original blueprints showing every mechanical detail. In careful engineer's handwriting, someone had noted, "Manual operation maintained for emergency water management." The dam was still private property, abandoned and forgotten, sitting there like a loaded weapon nobody remembered they owned. My dad used to say, "Sometimes the best solutions are hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone smart enough to notice them." He was talking about engineering problems, but apparently it applied to revenge too. Monday morning found me at the state revenue office, following a paper trail through 4 departments and 5 cups of increasingly bitter coffee. The clerk, bless her bureaucratic soul, finally located the dam's tax record buried in a filing cabinet that probably hadn't been opened since Bush was president. "Mountain View Dam. Oh my goodness, sir. This property has $1,200 in unpaid taxes dating back 18 years. Montana law allows purchase for the tax amount owed. Are you interested?" $1,200. I'd spent more than that on dinner in Seattle. But the real beauty was in those engineering specifications. The dam could legally lower water levels by 10 feet without violating flood control regulations. 10 feet would expose every foundation Victoria's crews had poured, turning their construction site into a very expensive mud pit. More interesting, it would expose whatever secrets were buried under 80 years of lake bottom sediment. When I got home, there was another note tucked under my windshield wiper. "Final warning. Take the offer and disappear." I looked across the water at construction lights blazing on the eastern shore, crews working around the clock to beat some mysterious deadline. Then I looked at the dam deed in my truck's glove compartment, my signature still wet on the purchase agreement. Time to show Victoria what happens when you corner someone who actually understands how water works. Victoria's final chess move came with the subtle grace of a sledgehammer through a cathedral window. Thursday morning, I'm drinking coffee on my non-compliant granite ledge when this black sedan pulls into my driveway. Out steps a guy in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase and the kind of smile that makes honest people check their wallets. Mr. Riverside, I'm attorney Harrison Wild, representing the Crystal Springs Development Authority. I have a restraining order preventing you from interfering with legitimate community development. He slides the papers across my stone railing like he's dealing poker. Apparently, I'd threatened critical infrastructure and posed a clear and present danger to community welfare. News to me, but there it was in legal black and white. The kicker? I was now legally prohibited from operating, tampering with, or even approaching any water control structures within the county. Someone had done their homework and figured out I owned the dam. This is temporary, of course, Wild said, his voice carrying that practiced lawyer smugness, just until we can resolve this misunderstanding. Right, a misunderstanding worth $1 million restraining order, but Victoria wasn't done flexing her political muscles. By Friday afternoon, bulldozers were clearing trees on what was definitely my property. Century-old pines that had watched this water grow from a mining pond to pristine wilderness. The sound of chainsaws echoed across the water like mechanical screams. I called the sheriff, got voicemail. I called the county supervisor. We'll look into it. I called the state environmental office. Sir, we're still processing your complaint. Meanwhile, those pines, trees my grandfather had climbed as a boy, crashed into the water with splashes that sent waves lapping against my ledge. The water turned brown with churned-up sediment, and by evening, dead fish were floating belly up near my shoreline. The smell hit you first, that sickly sweet stench of ecological disaster mixed with diesel fuel and fresh-cut timber. Construction runoff was turning Crystal Springs into a toxic soup. That night, sitting on my ledge with a whiskey and the sound of generators humming across the water, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my father died: complete helplessness. Here I was, a guy who'd built water treatment systems and designed flood controls, watching my family's legacy get bulldozed by money and corruption. I picked up my grandfather's photograph from the side table, him standing on this same ledge in 1958, holding a trout that was probably swimming in cleaner water than we had now. He taught me that some things were worth fighting for, even when the deck was stacked against you, especially then. Friday morning brought another visit from Wild, this time with a county deputy in tow. Emergency court hearing scheduled for Monday afternoon. They wanted an injunction to make my restraining order permanent. Judge Rodriguez is very concerned about public safety, Wild explained with that reptilian smile, particularly regarding aging infrastructure operated by emotionally compromised individuals. Emotionally compromised. Nice. That was their angle. Paint me as the crazy guy whose daughter's departure turned him into a domestic terrorist with a dam. But while they were busy character assassinating me in court papers, I was learning some interesting things about my new property. Those 1922 engineering specs weren't just blueprints. They were a manual for controlled environmental justice. The dam's design was elegant in its simplicity. Lower the water 10 feet, and you'd expose construction foundations while maintaining downstream flow for environmental protection. But lower it 15 feet? Well, that would expose whatever industrial waste previous developers had dumped in the deep water over the decades. I spent the weekend testing the dam's manual controls under cover of pre-dawn darkness, learning the feel of those brass wheels and the sound of water rushing through opened gates. The metallic taste of stress and sleepless nights had become my constant companion, but those cold steel controls under my palms felt like hope. Sunday evening, I got a call from my daughter Emma in Portland. "Dad, I saw the news online. Are you okay? Mom says you're obsessing over this property thing." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just protecting what your great-grandfather built." "But is it worth all this? Maybe you should just take their money and buy something else." I looked across the water at the construction lights blazing through the night, crews working around the clock to pour foundations before Monday's court hearing. "Some things aren't for sale, Emma. Someday you'll understand." After we hung up, I sat on the ledge listening to those generators hum their mechanical lullaby. In 20 hours, they'd ask a judge to strip away my right to operate the dam, but they'd made one crucial mistake in their legal strategy. Court was scheduled for 2 p.m. Monday. The dam didn't have business hours, time to show them what clear and present danger really looked like. Sunday night, while Victoria was probably polishing her court testimony, Rebecca Martinez from the County Tribune called with news that changed everything. "Marcus, you need to hear this." Her voice carried that electric excitement of a reporter who'd struck gold. "I've been digging into the Sterling's finances for my story, and holy cow, they're broke." Broke. The woman with the designer boots and million-dollar development schemes was financially underwater. Rebecca had spent weeks following paper trails through shell companies and offshore accounts. Turns out Victoria's previous developments in Colorado had bankrupted spectacularly. Environmental lawsuits, cost overruns, and at least one project that literally sank into contaminated soil. "She's borrowed against everything," Rebecca explained. "Their house, Garrett's equipment, even her mother's retirement account. This retreat project isn't just their golden opportunity, it's their only way to avoid complete financial ruin." But the real bombshell came when Rebecca started investigating the Development Authority's emergency powers clause that Victoria had used to steamroll the property grab. "I called every homeowner on the water," Rebecca said. "Guess what? Half of them never got notification about that emergency meeting. State law requires 75-day written notice to all property owners for any vote involving eminent domain or property transfer. The entire vote was illegal. Every signature, every approval, every legal document they'd waved in my face. Worthless paper backed by nothing but Victoria's desperation and expensive lawyers." "There's more," Rebecca continued. "Remember that environmental complaint you filed? Well, it triggered an automatic record search. The EPA found something interesting about Crystal Springs' history. My dam wasn't just a tool for lowering water levels, it was the key to unlocking decades of buried evidence. The original mining company hadn't just extracted ore. They dumped industrial waste, chemicals, and construction debris directly into the water. When subsequent developers needed to dispose of inconvenient materials, they followed the same pattern. Lower the water level enough, and all those secrets would surface like bloated corpses," Rebecca explained. "The EPA suspects we're looking at a potential Superfund site. If contamination is confirmed, the federal government takes control. No development, no construction, no exceptions. They'll spend years cleaning up the mess. And guess who gets stuck with the bill? Previous property owners, current developers, anyone who'd ever touched the contaminated land." Suddenly, Victoria's rush to pour foundations made perfect sense. She wasn't just building retreats, she was racing against time before someone discovered the environmental time bomb sitting under her million-dollar dreams. Federal environmental law doesn't care about your financial problems or political connections. Contamination creates automatic liability that follows you forever, crushing property values and generating cleanup costs that could reach millions. "Here's the beautiful part," Rebecca continued. "The moment contamination is officially confirmed, all construction bonds and insurance policies become void. Garrett's company would be personally liable for every dollar of environmental damage, past and present." I'm sitting on my ledge, phone pressed to my ear, watching those construction lights burn across the water while understanding finally dawned. Victoria wasn't just stealing my land, she was using it as collateral in a desperate gamble to avoid bankruptcy. But environmental crimes have a way of surfacing eventually, like oil slicks that can't stay hidden forever. "When's your court hearing?" Rebecca asked. "Tomorrow at 2 p.m. "Perfect timing. I'm filing my exposé tomorrow morning, and I've already contacted 4 environmental groups about attending your hearing. Judge Rodriguez hates media circuses, but she loves public accountability." After hanging up, I sat in the growing darkness, listening to the sound of generators and heavy machinery working through the night. Victoria thought she was building her financial salvation, but she was actually constructing her own environmental prison. Time to help her finish the job. Monday morning at 5 a.m., my kitchen table looked like a command center. Coffee brewing, phone charging, and 4 laptops open to different government databases. Time to turn Rebecca's intelligence into actionable strategy. First call went to Roy Blackhorse, retired forest ranger who'd been watching this environmental disaster unfold with the quiet fury of someone who'd spent 45 years protecting wilderness from exactly this kind of greed. "Roy, I need documentation, every environmental violation, every dead fish, every gallon of toxic runoff." His gravelly voice carried satisfaction. "Son, I've been photographing their mess since day one. Got pictures of them dumping concrete directly into spawning beds, chemicals leaching into groundwater, and sediment plumes that killed 4 generations of trout fingerlings." Roy had contacts throughout the EPA's regional office, guys who'd rather spend their careers prosecuting environmental criminals than shuffling paperwork. Real enforcement agents who understood that some contamination sites were too dangerous to ignore. "I'll have federal inspectors here by Wednesday," he promised, "but you need to give them something dramatic to look at." That's where the dam came in. Next, I called Daniel Cross, the environmental lawyer who'd been itching to take on a high-profile case against corrupt developers. His pro bono work had shut down 4 illegal developments in the past 7 years, and Victoria's scheme had all the elements he loved: political corruption, environmental destruction, and federal law violations. "Marcus, this is beautiful," Daniel said, his voice carrying that predatory excitement of a shark smelling blood. "We're not just fighting a property dispute, we're exposing systematic environmental fraud. Federal agencies have unlimited resources for cases like this." Daniel's strategy was elegant. File simultaneous lawsuits in federal and state courts citing violations of the Clean Water Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and Montana's environmental protection statutes. Create so much legal paperwork that Victoria's lawyers would spend months just reading our complaints. "The beauty of environmental law," Daniel explained, "is that ignorance isn't a defense. If you contaminate public waterways, you're liable regardless of intent or previous ownership." But legal strategy was just the foundation. We needed public pressure, media coverage, and political accountability that would make this case too visible to bury in bureaucratic delays. Rebecca had already coordinated with 4 environmental groups and 3 investigative reporters from Billings. Her morning expose would hit every local news outlet simultaneously, creating the kind of media firestorm that politicians feared more than campaign finance violations. I've got drone footage of the contamination, recorded phone calls of Victoria trying to bribe county officials, and financial documents showing the Sterling's shell game, Rebecca reported. This story writes itself. The technical aspects required more delicate coordination. I'd studied those 1922 dam specifications until I could operate the controls blindfolded. The key was precise water level management. Drop it exactly 10 feet to expose construction foundations, then another 5 feet to reveal the buried contamination without violating downstream flood control regulations. Modern environmental monitoring had given me tools my grandfather never dreamed of. Roy's contact at the university had provided water quality sensors that would document contamination levels in real time as the lake level dropped. Every toxin, every chemical signature, every piece of evidence would be recorded automatically. The EPA loves hard data, Daniel explained. Give them irrefutable proof of contamination, and they'll move heaven and earth to prosecute. Community support was building organically. Jake Patterson, the downstream landowner whose water rights were being affected by Victoria's construction, had rallied 6 other property owners who'd never received legal notification about the Development Authority vote. Their joint lawsuit would challenge the development's fundamental legal authority. We've got standing, we've got damages, and we've got evidence of procedural violations, Jake reported. Even if they win on environmental grounds, we can stop them on basic property law. The timing had to be surgical, court hearing at 2 p.m., with Victoria expecting to get her permanent injunction against dam operation. But federal environmental law supersedes local court orders, and contamination discovery triggers automatic construction moratoriums that no judge can override. My plan was simple. Begin controlled water drainage at dawn, expose the contamination before the court hearing, and let federal law enforcement take control of the situation. By the time Victoria's lawyers finished arguing about restraining orders, the EPA would have jurisdiction over the entire water system. One thing worries me, Daniel warned. Desperate people do desperate things. If Victoria realizes her scheme is collapsing, she might try something dangerous. I thought about those security guards prowling my property, the anonymous threats, the systematic intimidation campaign. Victoria had already shown she was willing to bend laws and pressure officials. Cornered animals were capable of anything. I'll be careful, I promised. But this ends tomorrow, one way or another. As I finished my second pot of coffee, watching construction lights burn across the water, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Control. For the first time since this nightmare started, I wasn't reacting to Victoria's moves. I was making mine. Victoria's desperation hit like a Category 5 hurricane at 3:30 a.m. Tuesday morning. I woke to the sound of bolt cutters working on my gate, that distinctive metallic snap that means someone's not planning to knock politely. Through my bedroom window, I could see flashlight beams dancing around the dam structure, and the acrid smell of cutting torch sparks drifted through the pine-scented air. 4 guys in dark clothing were trying to disable the dam's manual controls, probably figuring they could sabotage the mechanism before I had a chance to use it. What they didn't count on was Roy's volunteer security detail, retired military guys who'd been taking shifts watching my property since the threat started. "Hey," Roy's voice boomed across the water. "You boys lost." The sound of scrambling footsteps and slamming car doors told me they weren't planning to stick around for introductions. By the time I pulled on boots and grabbed a flashlight, they were gone, leaving behind cut fence wire and scorch marks on the dam housing. But Victoria was just getting warmed up. Tuesday morning brought a visit from the county building inspector, the same guy who'd rubber-stamped every Development Authority violation against my property. This time, he had new concerns about my aging electrical systems and potential fire hazards that required immediate professional inspection. Cost? $15,000, payable in advance, with work to be performed by county-approved contractors only. Funny thing about those approved contractors, they were all mysteriously booked solid for the next 8 months. "Safety first, Mr. Riverside," the inspector said with a straight face. "We can't have dangerous conditions threatening the community." The community. Right. The same community that was dumping construction chemicals into our drinking water. When that didn't work, Victoria played her media card. By Wednesday afternoon, the local paper ran a front-page story about my increasingly erratic behavior and obsession with controlling water levels that could endanger downstream residents. The article quoted anonymous sources, probably Victoria's book club, expressing concern about my mental state since my daughter moved away. Apparently, I'd been spotted talking to myself during walks around the water and acting aggressively toward construction workers. The talking to myself was actually phone calls with Daniel, and the aggressive behavior was asking crews to stop dumping concrete directly into fish spawning areas. But facts have never been journalism's strong suit when there's a narrative to sell. But the real masterpiece was Victoria's attempted bribery of Judge Rodriguez's clerk. Rebecca caught it on a hidden camera, thanks to the clerk's suspicion about an unsolicited lunch invitation from a woman she'd never met. There was Victoria in a downtown restaurant, explaining how a small administrative fee could ensure my court case received proper consideration. Environmental extremists can be so litigious, Victoria explained over salmon and white wine. Sometimes the system needs help protecting reasonable development from frivolous complaints. The clerk, bless her honest heart, played along just long enough to get Victoria's offer on tape. $7,000 to delay my hearing until after construction was completed. Not enough to buy a judge, but plenty to purchase some convenient scheduling conflicts. When that failed, Victoria tried going directly to my bank. Thursday morning, I got a call from my loan officer explaining that concerns had been raised about my financial stability and ability to maintain current credit agreements. Someone had suggested I was facing significant legal expenses that might affect my payment capacity. "We're not calling the loan," he assured me nervously, "but we need updated financial statements and a psychiatric evaluation before we can approve any new credit applications." A psychiatric evaluation to maintain my checking account. While Victoria was busy character assassinating me, her construction crews were working around the clock to beat some invisible deadline. Floodlights turned night into artificial day, and the constant rumble of heavy machinery had every eagle on the water heading for quieter territory. But here's what desperation makes you do. It makes you sloppy. Jake Patterson's trail cameras caught Garrett's crews dumping something into the water at 2:30 a.m. Wednesday night. 60-gallon drums with chemical company logos rolled off a flatbed truck and pushed into deep water near the eastern shore. The footage was crystal clear, hazmat labels, EPA violation stickers, and Garrett himself directing the operation while checking his watch like a man running out of time. They're not just hiding old contamination, Daniel realized when he saw the video. They're creating new contamination to muddy the waters about who's responsible for what. Smart strategy if you're completely sociopathic. Dump fresh chemicals on top of old waste, then claim any contamination discovered was recent and accidental, rather than decades-old systematic dumping. But environmental forensics can distinguish between old and new contamination through chemical aging and sediment layer analysis. Trying to hide evidence by creating more evidence was like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Friday evening, 36 hours. Before my court hearing, Victoria made her final desperate play. The county sheriff delivered an emergency psychiatric hold order signed by a judge in the next county over. One who'd apparently never seen my case file but had received very convincing testimony about my deteriorating mental state and threats against public infrastructure. 12 hours in county lockup for psychological evaluation, just long enough to miss the court hearing that would strip away my damn operating rights forever. Almost worked too. The psychiatric hold gambit almost worked. Keyword being almost. Daniel Cross had been expecting something like this. When you corner desperate people with federal environmental charges looming, they tend to get creative with legal technicalities. He'd already filed emergency motions challenging the hold order's jurisdiction and requesting immediate psychiatric evaluation by an independent doctor. Dr. Margaret Stevens, a forensic psychiatrist who specialized in competency evaluations, showed up at the county jail Saturday morning with a briefcase full of standardized tests and 0 patients for political theater. "Mr. Riverside," she said, settling into the interview room's plastic chair, "I've reviewed your case file, and frankly, this evaluation request reads like someone's legal Hail Mary. Let's get through this quickly so you can deal with your actual problems." 3 hours of cognitive tests, personality assessments, and detailed interviews about my mental state, family history, and response to stress. Dr. Stevens documented everything with clinical precision, occasionally raising an eyebrow at particularly creative accusations in Victoria's sworn statement. "According to this affidavit, you've been observed talking to invisible companions and exhibiting paranoid fixation on water control systems," she noted dryly. "The invisible companions were phone calls, I assume, unless you count your grandfather's ghost telling you to fight for your land." She actually smiled at that. "Mr. Riverside, you're dealing with extraordinary stress in a completely rational manner. This hold order is medically baseless and legally questionable. I'll have my report filed within the hour." By Saturday afternoon, I was free with a clean bill of mental health and documentation that Victoria's psychiatric claims were fabricated. But the real victory came when Daniel discovered who had signed the emergency hold order. Judge William Thornton from Madison County, who happened to be Garrett Sterling's golf partner and had received generous campaign contributions from 5 companies in Victoria's development consortium. This isn't just corruption, Daniel explained, his voice carrying the predatory satisfaction of a prosecutor who'd been handed a smoking gun. This is conspiracy to abuse the judicial system for personal gain. Federal crime, career-ending, prison time level, stupid. While I was getting psychologically evaluated, Rebecca's expose had hit every major news outlet in Montana. Her investigation revealed the full scope of Victoria's scheme: shell companies, bribed officials, environmental cover-ups, and systematic intimidation of property owners who stood in the way of profit. The story went viral on social media, complete with drone footage of toxic waste drums being dumped into pristine lake water. Crystal Springs scandal was trending statewide, and environmental groups from Seattle to Denver were demanding federal investigation. But Victoria wasn't finished fighting. Sunday morning brought her final, most desperate gambit: attempted purchase of water rights from the county through an emergency weekend session she'd somehow convinced 4 commissioners to attend. Emergency flood control measures, she called it, claiming my dam operation posed imminent danger to downstream communities and required county intervention. If they could claim eminent domain over the dam itself, my ownership would become irrelevant. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., Sunday in the courthouse basement with minimal public notice and no media allowed. Classic small-town corruption. Make the important decisions when nobody's watching. Except Jake Patterson had been tracking county meeting schedules and Roy had contacts throughout the bureaucracy who didn't appreciate weekend corruption sessions. By 9:45 a.m., the courthouse steps were packed with environmental protesters, property rights activists, and 4 news crews who'd somehow gotten wind of the secret meeting. Signs reading "Stop Environmental Crime" and "Investigate Sterling Corruption" filled the small plaza. Judge Rodriguez herself showed up, having been alerted by her clerk about Victoria's bribery attempt and the questionable timing of this emergency session. Federal judges don't appreciate local politics interfering with their court schedules. Gentlemen, she announced to the 4 commissioners, any decisions made regarding water rights or dam operation will be immediately challenged in federal court as interfering with ongoing environmental investigation. I suggest you table this discussion until proper legal procedures are followed. The meeting lasted 12 minutes and accomplished exactly nothing except generating more negative publicity for Victoria's increasingly desperate situation. Sunday evening, as I sat on my ledge preparing for Monday's court hearing, the construction lights across the water burned brighter than ever. Crews were working triple shifts now, pouring foundation concrete faster than environmental inspectors could document violations. But desperation makes people sloppy, and Victoria's crew had made a critical error. In their rush to beat federal intervention, they'd started building foundations below the lake's natural water line, the area that would be exposed when I lowered the water level. Those foundations would become evidence exhibits the moment EPA investigators saw them. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Federal environmental team arrives tomorrow, 6 a.m. Timing is everything now. I looked across the water at those construction lights, then down at the dam keys in my palm. Brass and steel worn smooth by my grandfather's hands and now warm from mine. Tomorrow morning, Victoria would learn the difference between having money and having leverage. Time to teach her about water dynamics and environmental justice. Monday morning, 5:30 a.m. The brass wheels of the dam felt cold under my palms as I began what my grandfather would have called letting the truth rise to the surface. The sound of rushing water echoed across Crystal Springs as 80 years of accumulated secrets prepared to see daylight. I'd calculated the drainage rate precisely, 10 feet in 5 hours, exposing construction foundations while maintaining downstream flow for safety. Across the water, construction crews were arriving for another day of foundation pouring, their diesel engines coughing to life in the pre-dawn darkness. The foreman's radio chatter carried across the water as they realized something was terribly wrong. Water levels dropping fast, shut down the concrete trucks. By 7 a.m., Victoria's million-dollar construction site was transforming into an environmental crime scene. Exposed lake bottom revealed decades of buried industrial waste, rusted machinery, chemical drums, concrete chunks, and a rainbow sheen of petroleum products that had been hidden under 80 years of sediment. The smell hit you first, that toxic cocktail of rotting organics and industrial chemicals that makes your throat burn and your eyes water. This wasn't just contamination. This was an environmental disaster that had been festering in the dark, while Victoria built her dreams on top of it. Federal EPA agents arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, just as Roy had promised. 4 black SUVs and a mobile testing lab that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Dr. Sarah Bennett, the lead environmental scientist, took one look at the exposed contamination and immediately declared the entire area a federal investigation site. Jesus Christ, she muttered, snapping photographs of chemical drums with faded hazmat labels. This is a Superfund site waiting to happen. Rebecca's news crews were documenting everything: drone footage of the toxic wasteland, interviews with EPA agents, and real-time water quality readings that showed contamination levels spiking as buried waste was exposed to air and water. But the real show started when Victoria arrived. Her pearl-white Range Rover came roaring down the access road at 8:30, gravel spraying as she hit the brakes near the dam. She stumbled out wearing designer jeans and a panic-stricken expression, her usual composure shattered by the sight of her project drowning in toxic mud. "You can't do this," she screamed, pointing an accusatory finger at me while news cameras rolled. "That damn operation is illegal. I have a restraining order." "Actually, ma'am," Dr. Bennett interrupted, stepping between us with the calm authority of someone who'd shut down more illegal developments than Victoria had built. "Mr. Riverside is operating under Federal Environmental Protection Authority. Your local restraining order is superseded by federal jurisdiction." The color drained from Victoria's face as the implications hit her. Federal jurisdiction meant federal prosecution, federal penalties, and federal prison time for environmental crimes. "This contamination didn't come from our project," she said desperately, her voice cracking. "It was already here. We're the victims." That's when Jake Patterson stepped forward with his trail camera footage showing Garrett's crews dumping fresh chemical drums just 3 nights earlier. "Mrs. Sterling," Dr. Bennett said, reviewing the video on Jake's phone, "environmental forensics can distinguish between historical contamination and recent dumping. What we're seeing here appears to be both." The crowd was growing by the minute. Environmental activists, property owners, concerned citizens, and 4 news crews broadcasting live coverage of Montana's newest environmental scandal. The courthouse steps had become an impromptu town hall with people demanding answers about decades of regulatory failure. Judge Rodriguez arrived at 9 a.m., surveying the chaos with the weary expression of someone who'd seen too many corruption cases in small-town politics. "Well," she announced to the assembled crowd, "I think we can cancel this afternoon's court hearing. Federal environmental law takes precedence over local restraining orders." That's when Victoria made her final desperate play. "You're all being manipulated," she shouted, her voice carrying that shrill edge of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. "This man is a domestic terrorist who's destroyed our community's economic future out of spite and mental illness." The crowd fell silent. News cameras zoomed in. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the mic drop confrontation between David and Goliath. I walked slowly toward Victoria, holding the original 1923 deed and the EPA contamination report that Dr. Bennett had just handed me. "Victoria," I said, my voice carrying across the water loud enough for every camera to capture, "I didn't create this contamination. I just lowered the water level enough to expose what you and your friends have been hiding for decades." I held up the deed. "This dam has been protecting this lake's water quality for a century. Your project would have built luxury retreats directly on top of a toxic waste dump, selling families properties that would have poisoned their children." The crowd erupted. Reporters surged forward. Camera flashes popped like 4th of July fireworks. And Victoria Sterling, Development Authority chairman and would-be environmental criminal, was led away in handcuffs by federal agents while her husband's construction equipment sat stranded in toxic mud that would take years and millions of dollars to clean up properly. Justice has a sound, and it sounds like water flowing freely after decades of artificial constraints. 20 months later, I'm sitting on my ledge drinking morning coffee from my grandfather's thermos, watching eagles dive in water cleaner than it's been since the 1920s. The federal cleanup transformed Crystal Springs into a showcase of environmental restoration. $2.8 million in Superfund money removed 50 years of buried contamination, while university researchers turned the project into a living laboratory for ecological recovery. Victoria got 4 years in federal prison for environmental conspiracy, bribery, and fraud. Her husband Garrett lost his construction license permanently and filed bankruptcy when the cleanup costs exceeded his insurance coverage by about $2.5 million. Their house, the biggest one on the water, sold at auction for 25 cents on the dollar. The Development Authority got disbanded and reformed with an environmental protection mandate that actually means something. Jake Patterson became chairman, and their first official act was establishing a 15-year development moratorium to protect the watershed while nature healed itself. Property values around the water increased 25% once the EPA certified the water as clean. Turns out people pay premium prices for pristine environments, not luxury retreats built on toxic waste. But the real victory was watching my daughter Emma bring her boyfriend up here last summer. 4 generations fishing from the same ledge, teaching the same lessons about conservation and fighting for what's right. Emma caught her first trout in water so clear you could see the bottom at 20 feet. The dam became a historical landmark with an interpretive trail explaining how citizen action and environmental law can protect natural resources from corporate greed. School groups visit regularly to learn about water management and environmental science. I kept my hydraulic consulting business but added a new specialty, helping communities fight corrupt development through proper environmental enforcement. Turns out there are a lot of Victorias out there, and they all make the same mistakes when they're desperate. Here's what I learned that might help you. Property research always starts with your deed. Those old documents often include rights you didn't know you owned. Tax auction properties can give you legal leverage for pennies on the dollar, especially if governments have forgotten what they're supposed to maintain. Environmental contamination creates automatic federal authority that trumps local corruption every single time. Most importantly, when someone tries to intimidate you with expensive lawyers and political connections, remember that federal environmental law protects whistleblowers and rewards people who report violations. The EPA has unlimited resources for prosecuting environmental crimes, and they love cases that come gift-wrapped with evidence. The Crystal Springs Conservation Scholarship now awards $20,000 annually to students pursuing environmental engineering. We fund it through money saved during the cleanup process. Funny how federal efficiency worked better than local corruption. Every summer we host Clean Water Days, a weekend festival celebrating environmental restoration. Families camp on the restored shoreline, kids learn about water ecology, and adults share stories about protecting natural resources for future generations. Rebecca and I got married last fall, combining our skills to help communities across 4 states fight similar environmental justice battles. She investigates, I provide technical expertise, and together we've stopped 8 illegal developments and helped prosecute 6 corrupt officials. The old dam still operates perfectly, its brass wheels turning smooth as silk whenever we need to manage water levels for flood control or maintenance. Sometimes I find myself standing there at dawn, thinking about my grandfather's hands on those same controls, protecting the same water for the same reasons. Conservation isn't just about preserving the past, it's about ensuring the future has something worth inheriting. That dam wheel still turns smooth as the day it was built, and I still drink my morning coffee on the ledge where my grandfather taught me that some things are worth fighting for, no matter how powerful the opposition or how steep the odds. Speaking of fighting the good fight, I want to hear about your development authority nightmares. Drop a comment below about your worst homeowners association horror story. I read every single one, and they helped me choose the next environmental justice battle to investigate. And if you want to see more David versus Goliath stories where the little guy actually wins for once, hit that subscribe button. Next week, I'm telling you about the rancher who discovered his neighbor's million-dollar mansion was built entirely on his land and the brilliant way he handled that situation. Trust me, you won't want to miss how that one played out. Until then, remember, sometimes the best solutions are hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to turn the wheel. From all of us here at Property Wars, thanks so much for watching today's Development Authority Karen Meltdown. If you enjoyed seeing neighbors stand their ground and karma catch up, smash that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you won't miss the next property drama we bring you.